All right. Good evening. I'd like to call to order the November 16th meeting of the Harbor Commission. Jeanette, would you like to call roll, please?
Yes, Jim Sloan.
Here.
Bill Spicer.
Here.
Betsy Kramer. Merritt McRae.
Here.
Lang Sly.
Here.
Shoham Yaniv is absent tonight.
Okay. All right. Any changes to the agenda, Scott?
No changes, Mr. Chair.
Okay. This would be the time that we'd open it up to public comment, but I don't see that we have any. So why don't we move ahead to approval of the minutes? Do you want to read the recommendation, please? Okay.
Seconded?
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Okay. Let's go ahead to the department updates, director's report.
Well, good evening, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. Since we last met, the Council authorized the execution of a 5-year lease agreement with one 5-year option with Lisa Clegg and her daughter, Shauna Franks, doing business as Harbor Market, as they've been doing for many years, at 125 Harbor Way. Council also waived the formal bid procedure and authorized the General Services Manager to issue a sole source purchase order for the purchase of 10 more Luke parking payment stations, self-pay stations, in an amount not to exceed $110,000. And these machines are intended, we're just going to put more for better customer service at peak times in lots where they've already been installed. It's not really new installations per se. We're just adding a few. Council also waived the formal bid procedure and authorized the General Service Manager to do a sole source purchase order to Pacific Dredge Company for West Beach dredging in an amount not to exceed $722,000. And this is the to deal with the heavy shoaling that's been occurring outside the federal channel, which is the city's responsibility to maintain and not the Army Corps. But the reason we went with the sole source was justified by the fact that the Army Corps bids it out every 3 years anyway, so we just went with their contractor. So saving the mobilization costs, we intend to piggyback this project immediately following either their fall dredge cycle is what we'd hope for, but either this fall or this spring we'll get that work done after the Corps is done with theirs. So there's some good savings there. And meanwhile, Dominique Samario and I flew up to Sacramento to meet with the California Air Resources Board on November 1st. We have a kind of an emerging issue for our cruise ship program, and that is the Air Resources Board brought down a rule that said they want the ships to plug in to shore power when they're visiting. And this could have a profound impact on the entire cruise ship industry in California. Very few facilities have any kind of shore power. There is shore power in Alaska, in Juneau, I believe. So we met with them face-to-face and sort of explained the realities in Santa Barbara. And I was glad we did so, and we brought an aerial photo and so forth of that we timed it. We do an aerial photo every year, but we timed it when a ship was in this fall so they could see the relationship of the ship to the harbor and understand that it can't come in. And judging by the agenda and the questions that they were asking, where does it come in to fuel up? Well, it doesn't, and can you build a pier so it can dock? And, we can't do that. And these ships, evidently, the staff has been looking into this, the Air Resources Board staff, and where a container ship, apparently they said, requires 2 megawatts or something of electrical power, the cruise ships require some 5 to 10 megawatts. That's a lot of power. So we can't just have a big shore power cord and some pilings out there in them, So I was glad. I think they saw the reality of it, and they explained that the board, hands down these decisions, and the staff has to figure out how to execute it. So Dominique's already been to one workshop via a webinar deal, and will attend the next 2 over the next 2 years. And we believe that the intention is to put in place certain amendments to this overarching rule of every ship's got to plug in when it's around. I mean, our argument is it's not at berth. It's swinging on its anchor 3/4 of a mile offshore. So anyway, that was interesting. Big day, up and back in one day. And yeah, that's about that. As far as the December meeting, we have formally canceled it. We have not sent out the announcement to you all yet, but it's been officially canceled. So with that, I'd answer any questions.
Questions, anybody? Merritt?
I'm so glad to hear that West Beach is going to get dredged out. And I'm glad that it's going to happen in the near term, too. That's awesome.
Thank you. It's been something we've been very concerned with. I know Carl's been reporting out on it the last few months, and it's very, very shallow there. So,
Can you remind me, when is the fall dredge cycle?
Chair Sloan, the fall cycle dredging will begin December 11th.
Okay.
And I don't know if we'll be able to do the West Beach dredging at the tail end of it. It's probably more likely it would be at the beginning of the spring cycle dredging, the way things are working out.
Is it better to wait till spring once we get...
Not
Storm.
necessarily. It's a matter of permit review and sediment sampling. Some agencies want us to sample and some don't, so we're kind
Okay.
of grappling with that right now.
Yeah. And then on the CARB requirements, when would we hear about that?
well, we'll keep, Mr. Chair, we'll keep informed, and as I said, Dominique will keep tabs on the next two meetings that they have, public meetings that they have, and we'll continue to provide comments. But not too much to worry about. The implementation date is 2030, so we've got a little bit of time here. It's not going away tomorrow.
Yeah, I see in the report that changes wouldn't be improved until 19 with implementation in 2030, so it's a ways out. So. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Moving right ahead. Brian?
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. I have two brief items on this month's Business Services Report. The first, I'd like to announce for the 8th consecutive year, the Waterfront Department is working with Stearns Wharf Business Association to bring a Christmas tree to the shoreward finger of Stearns Wharf. There are a few photos up on the screen for you. It's a 25-foot green-white fir Christmas tree from Oliver Holt Christmas Trees, and it will be in your packet. It says November 21st. We've moved that date. It's now November 27th, so it's the Monday after Thanksgiving, and it'll be set up that week, and the official lighting will take place on December 10th as part of the Parade of Lights. It'll actually be before the Parade of Lights, and Mayor Helene Schneider will be doing the honors this year. So we'd like to thank the Stearns Wharf Business Association for, again, coming forward and paying for that Christmas tree, and then we'll take over the installation component of it and decorating as well. And then second, I want to let everybody know that waterfront parking permits will be available for sale on December 1st. A general parking permit costs $100 for the year, and slip permittees, one per slip. Those are available at $70 for the year. And if you buy them December 1st, they are good through, or anytime you buy them, they're good through December 31st of 2018. So if you go the first day, you've got 13 months worth of parking. They're good at all of our parking lots along Cabrillo Boulevard, except for Stearns Wharf. That's the only lot that we don't take the permit at. And they are available at the waterfront offices as well as the waterfront parking kiosks. It's probably easier if you come up to the office and do it, just so people aren't backed up in a line trying to get out of the parking lot. So just wanted to let everybody know that. And again, $100 for general permits and then $70 for slip permittees. And that is the short and quick business services report for this month. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions?
Thank you, Mr. Bossy. How many parking spots does that cover with this permit?
That would cover about 2,600. I'm trying to do the math quick in my head and take out Stearns Wharf. We have a total of 2,768 parking spots in the 8 different lots in Stearns Wharf.
Great, thank you.
And the pricing remains the same from this year as well, correct?
That's correct. And then as the year goes on, it slowly
Right,
gets
right.
whittled down, yeah,
Yeah.
per our fee resolution. But yes, same as the last, I believe, 4 years, actually.
Right. Okay, great, thank you. Anything else? All right, thank you.
Good evening,
Yeah,
Mr.
please-
Chair and
please go ahead.
Commissioners.
I'm sorry, Nick.
That's okay. Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioner. I start the report tonight on a rather sad note. On October 24th, a passerby on West Beach called Harbor Patrol and noted that we had a deceased body floating off of West Beach between the bait barge and West Beach. And responded to that. We confirmed, in fact, it was a deceased individual. Harbor Patrol pulled that person to shore. It was a 78-year-old man. There were no foul play suspected, and the coroner came down and pronounced him dead on arrival, and he was taken away. So this happens now and then in bays and harbors and estuaries, and it's just a sad time whenever it does. And we always hope to get to these before they happen, but sometimes they just happen, and we're very, very sorry for the individual and his family and loved ones. That being said, we're going to move on to lighter fare. I know Commissioner Sloan was very interested in a Harbor Festival recap last time, so as promised, I have that for you. I have to admit it was extremely exciting, but if you're looking for something that really deviated from 2016, it wasn't that much different. All that was good in 16 was good in 17. We had over 15,000 people this year. On October 14th, they really swarmed the harbor. I like to think, modesty not prevailing, that this festival is really on the map and people to circle their calendars, and it's an honor for us to help put it on, and we're flattered that people come down. So we had about 15,000 people, as always. Fresh seafood, including crab, lobster, oysters, uni, paella, albacore, clam chowder, mussels, fish tacos, and whatnot, were the centerpiece of the celebration. But of course, we also had the marine education booths on the city pier. It's quite a task now in the morning to keep the fishermen side from not colliding with the marine education side, but we staggered it as such, so there was a good throughway all the way through. And also the Maritime Museum had over 1,000 people visit the Spirit of Dana Point, the tall ship that was tied to the north side of the city pier. They were lined up all day long. We had 5 bands and over 40 arts and crafts vendors. They all love the festival. They're all signed up for next year before we can close the doors on this year. So it's an indication of the kind of business we do. And also, I would be remiss if I didn't note the fact that the seafood may be the centerpiece, but the glue that really holds all this together are our volunteers, from not only the fishermen who volunteer in the albacore pit and lobster and crab boiling pit, but all the volunteers who participate in the booths. And I want to give special kudos to Santa Barbara City College's Culinary Arts program. They had a number of students come down. And again this year, UCSB Circle K International, sponsored by the Kiwanis Club, provided critical manpower and woman power, if you will, to the event. And it really, really makes a huge difference. They are gracious, hardworking, polite, just fantastic young men and women. We want to thank them, and we look forward to seeing them again next year. So if anybody missed the festival or loved it or heard about it from somebody else, you can circle your calendars now. It'll be October 13th next year. It's October 13th, 2018. And I have a few slides, not many, to show you, give you a sense of what it was like. So the fact that there's more humanity than pavement should tell you something about what the crowds look like here on Harbor Festival Day. Whoops, excuse me. The fresh fish sales, over the years, the folks selling fresh fish off the city pier on Harbor Festival Day have really sophisticated their presentations, their signage, their outreach, their customer service. It's really just a really high-end deal. Everybody's happy, the customer service is great, and the customers just absolutely love it. Here's some happy folks with fish tacos. There weren't very, I don't think I saw an unhappy person all day out of the 15,000. Quite honestly. And this is a shot of the city pier with all the fishermen's booths on one side, and you can't really see it too well, but on the other side are all the marine education booths all lined up on the opposite side of the pier. So it was jam-a-lamma from one end to the other with people and booths and fish, and it was just a great time. It really, really was. Very few hiccups. And putting that to rest, I have one more opportunity to talk to you about the Parade of Lights. And this time, so I wouldn't forget anything, whoops, I apologize. I missed the face painting kids from the Harbor Festival. That was one of the vendors, and as always, it's really, really popular with the young ones. But on to the Parade of Lights. Because I didn't want to miss any of the details, as I have had a habit of doing in the past, I committed it to PowerPoint slides this time. So it's Sunday, December 10th, and it begins with the Santa's Village event at 3 p.m. to 5. We have goodie bags. We're working with the Maritime Museum and Mother Stearns Candy, on Stearns Wharf, to put together goodie bags for first 400 children that come. We did 200 last year, and there were like 200 kids going, "Where's my goodie bag?" And so we're prepared to have 400 goodie bags for the children as they line up. Santa and Mrs. Claus will be there with their elves to greet the kids and the families. We'll have 10 tons of snow to start the event on the city pier for the kids to play in. And, of course, we'll have holiday music with the K-Light van on site at the foot of the city pier. Now, regarding the boat parade itself, it begins at 5:30 p.m., lasts until about 7. The 5 categories for entry are power, sail, commercial fishing, commercial other, and human powered. Boater entry is free. We're starting to get some entries already. It's quite exciting. They're available online. You can get them through our website. They're available hard copies at the Harbor Master's office, the Harbor Market, the Fuel Dock, and the Maritime Museum. So anytime you turn at the harbor these days, you're going to see a registration form for the Parade of Lights. So we hope people take advantage of that and register, and we have a robust parade. A 5-minute fireworks show provided by Garden State Fireworks will follow the boat parade. That'll be off of West Beach. And then as the coup de grace, we have the post-parade awards ceremony at the Maritime Museum. There'll be a really ample buffet for boat participants who participated in the parade. That's hosted by the Waterfront Grill. The ceremony is at the Maritime Museum. And about the prize packages, we touched on this briefly last month. They are really rich prize packages. First place in each of the 5 categories doesn't conclude, but starts with a $100 bill. And they include all kinds of things. The first 3 places in each category, you're going to see a mix of spas, hotel stays, boat rides, a restaurant, gift certificates, and more. Almost all of the folks in the harbor commercial area are ponying up to add donations to the prize packages. So it's going to be really, really robust in that manner. So all the pieces are in place. Folks should sign up, and we'll look forward to seeing them on December 10th, Sunday. And that concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Yeah, please.
I've got a minor question, Mick. Could you give a heads up to the participants? What exactly does Hollywood Holidays mean?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Kramer, it means whatever they want it to mean.
So how are the judges supposed to judge on that?
Sure, it's a fair question. If I was a judge and I saw somebody coming by with a huge screen and a Humphrey Bogart scene from The African Queen, I'd probably give it high marks. Now, I'm not saying, I'm just tossing it out there, but what we try to do is we try to come up with creative themes, the Parade of Lights Committee, which is part of the Harbor Merchants Association, Maritime Museum, Waterfront staff. We try to come up with themes that are creative, but themes to which you can decorate, that aren't so obtuse that you can't figure out how to decorate to them. So any and all things Hollywood would work.
Okay, great, thank you.
Sure.
Anything else? Nick, I have one thing. I think unfortunately, it's not on the last two. It's on the first one. So when was the last time we had this type of incident happen in the harbor?
Mr. Chair, I'd be hard-pressed to take a stab at that. I wouldn't want to speculate about it, but I'd certainly be happy to get back to you with an exact date, and I can email all the commissioners.
Yeah. And what do we try and learn from it? I mean, it's obviously an unfortunate event, but there's always something we try and learn from every one of these things.
Sure. Working with the police department and the county sheriffs, the coroner's office, what we try to do on the harbor patrol side and the harbor operations side is understand the circumstances, certainly determine that there was no foul play, and try to understand the circumstances that may have led to the victim, the deceased, or the person dying in the nearshore waters. If there was anything that indicated that we needed to make facilities changes or we needed to make operational changes, we would be paying very, very close attention to that. There are a couple of details associated with some of these, or a few details associated with some of these passings that we don't really share publicly because they're personal to the families, and that would be the case in this instance. But certainly we do a follow-up and a lessons learned anytime anybody is injured or worse at the waterfront.
Okay, and that's what I was after. I wasn't after what the details were. I was more what's the process of learning from it. And so, so you did get the final, or will get the final coroner's report and understand the circumstances?
We have a pretty good understanding of what happened in it, and it was unfortunate but not preventable.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Okay, moving ahead to new business. We have some recommendations.
Yes. Item 5, population and predation trends among great white sharks in Southern California. Recommendation that Harbor Commission receive a presentation on population and predation trends among great white sharks in Southern California from Dr. Chris Lowe, Director of the Shark Lab at California State University, Long Beach.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, I'd like to welcome Dr. Chris Lowe to the Harbor Commission tonight. He's a professor in marine biology and director of the Shark Lab at Cal State Long Beach, where he and his students work with acoustic and satellite telemetry to study the movement, behavior, and physiology of sharks. He's been active in this kind of research since 1998 at least. Spent some time in Hawaii doing this sort of research, and in 98 returned to Cal State Long Beach. And for the last 10 years, he and his students have been focusing on studying juvenile white sharks off Southern California and have greatly contributed to the field of knowledge for these animals, this species. And Dr. Lowe has earned several academic awards, including Cal State Long Beach Outstanding Professor Award and the 2012 Impact in Research Award. I think you'll find this presentation quite interesting.
Great.
So with that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Lowe.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So thanks for having me. We've learned quite a bit in the last 20, 25 years about white sharks, and a lot of that actually has come from historic fishing information. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But basically, one of the things that we've learned 25 years ago, if you asked any biologist what kind of shark we thought a white shark was, we would have said a coastal shark. And if you'd asked how we knew that, we'd say in the fall months, it's not uncommon to see these sharks along places like the Central California coast, particularly because they're there to take advantage of northern elephant seals that are coming in to give birth to their young, and of course feeding on those animals. So this phenomenon has also been seen down at Guadalupe Island, which is off the coast of Baja. But the other reason why we occasionally see white sharks close to shore is because Southern California, especially the Southern California Bight, from Point Conception down to about central Baja, is known to be a nursery for white sharks in the Northeast Pacific. And the way we know that is it's not uncommon for fishermen to catch baby white sharks off our coastal piers anytime between May and about October. So we found records dating back to the late 1800s of baby white sharks being caught in coastal beaches in Southern California. So we know from historic records that this phenomenon has been like this for quite some time. In addition, we also historically, globally, have learned a little bit about white shark history, life history, and they have life histories much like people. So they take a long time to reach sexual maturity, about 12 to 14 years. They can live to be about 70 years old. Females give birth to anywhere from 2 to 10 pups, maybe every 3 years. So in many ways, they're very kin to people in terms of their life history, and as a result, they're very easily overfished. So while there have never been a directed fishery for white sharks anywhere in the world because they've never occurred at high enough numbers, when they have been caught as bycatch, they have been landed, and of course their parts are sold, and they've always been of value. So for example, a set of adult white shark jaws can sell for over $16,000. The fins will sell for $200 a pound, and from an adult white shark you can get about 80 pounds of dried fin. And of course the meat is perfectly edible. Up into the mid-90s, till white sharks were protected in California. White sharks that were caught in commercial fisheries were landed and sold as shark in many fish markets and restaurants. So they have been caught as bycatch, and when they have, they've been landed. But by and large, it's been juveniles that have been occupying that fishery. And in addition, in 1994, the state of California enacted protection for white sharks because they understood their vulnerability and their role in the ecosystem. So in 94, they were protected. So if fishers caught them, they were required to release them. In 1997, they were protected throughout the Atlantic and Gulf of Mexico. In 2004, they were protected under CITES, which is the international treaty for prevention of sale of wildlife internationally. So their parts, their teeth, their meat could not be traded internationally. And then in 2005, they were protected throughout the rest of U.S. waters. So in essentially every place where white sharks occur in abundance, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, U.S., Mexico, they've been protected for effectively anywhere from 15 to 25 years. So when we started looking at historic fishing records of where white sharks might have interacted with any sort of fishery, recreational or commercial, we weren't surprised to find that 88% of all records we could find were associated with the gillnet fisheries in California, which started back as early as the 40s, but didn't really take off until the 70s. It was with the advent of plastic that gill nets became quite an effective fishing method. And of course, gill nets are nets you put in the water, fish get caught around the gills. It's a very effective mode of fishing. So what we saw from the two fisheries, there's an offshore fishery targeting things like swordfish and sharks, and then an inshore fishery that was targeting things like halibut, angel shark, and white sea bass, was those fisheries started in the late 80s. They kind of peaked in the mid-1980s, and then they started to decline. The bars that you see indicate sharks reported caught in the fishery. The blue bars represent baby white sharks. They're sharks that are less than 1 year old. And then the green bars are juveniles, and then the yellow bars are adults, and then unknowns. So what you can see is that the number of sharks reported caught in the fishery, and remember, prior to that, fishermen didn't even have to tell us what species it was. They just said they caught sharks and reported that. So we don't know exactly. These are ones where it was clearly identified as a white shark. But the other thing you'll notice is in 1994, the protection goes in place. So it's now illegal for fishers to land white sharks. And prior to that, all of them were landed. Also in 1994, the state banned the use of gill nets in nearshore waters. So it pushed gill netting out to outside 3 miles. So since then, both those gillnet fisheries have been significantly reduced. There's still gillnet fleets that fish in California, but they fish outside 3 miles. That gillnet fishing effort has been reduced by over 82% since its peak in the mid-1980s. But what we find really interesting is the number of sharks being reported caught in that fishery has steadily increased since the early 2000s. Now, as a biologist, quite often we look at that and go, okay, there's less fishing effort going on, but they're catching more of these sharks. This appears to us to be some sign of increase. And it makes sense. You protect white sharks. That's exactly what you'd expect to see. So in 2006, we started collaborating with Monterey Bay Aquarium, who were attempting to keep a white shark on exhibit. And one of their policies is they're not going to keep anything unless they know what kind of habitat requirements are needed to have a sufficient exhibit tank for them. So we started working with them in 2006 to try to get information about where white sharks, baby white sharks, hang out, what kind of conditions do they like, how long do they spend here, and things like that. So originally we started working with many of the commercial fishers that were accidentally catching these sharks in their nets. So we developed a partnership with many of these fishermen. So if they caught a shark, they would call us up, we'd meet them down the dock, my students and I could take measurements of the shark, tissue samples, we could tag the sharks with a variety of different types of transmitters, take them out offshore and let them go. And what we wanted to answer is, number one, can a shark caught in a gill net survive? Number two, if they do survive, where do they go? Do they spend a lot of time in Southern California? Are they migratory? If so, where do they migrate? And if they do migrate somewhere, do they come back? So to answer those questions, we use a variety of different types of technology that are literally evolved in the last 15 years. So one type we use are called spot tags. These are satellite transmitters that get bolted to the shark's dorsal fin. And every time the shark pops up, the transmitter transmits the satellites, and then it'll send me an email back at my office saying shark number 205 popped up at this latitude and longitude. When the shark goes underwater, it stops transmitting. So when we first started putting these on these sharks, we didn't expect to get a lot of detections because they're not marine mammals. They don't have to come to the surface to breathe. So we really didn't know if we were going to get a lot of information. So we accompanied that with another type of satellite tag called a PAT tag, which stands for Pop-Off Archiving Satellite Tag. Now these transmitters have a depth sensor, a temperature sensor, and a light sensor, a little computer, and they're recording all that information. This gets darted to the outside of the shark, and at a pre-described time and date, that tag pops off, floats to the surface, and then downloads all the data to the satellite, sends it back to me in my office. Now, it'll give us a rough estimate of where that shark was. It's not very accurate. In other words, its accuracy is about 60 nautical miles. So it gives us an indication if sharks have made long migrations and what the water temperatures and depths that they've moved through. The last type of technology we use is really to get fine-scale information, and that's using what we call acoustic telemetry. These are transmitters that we either surgically implant into the shark's body or we dart into their backs. Each transmitter has a unique ID code and uses an acoustic ping. Then we have these acoustic receivers all along the coast from about Avila Beach down to the Tijuana estuary. And they're constantly listening for these tagged sharks. So when a shark gets within about 500 yards of one of these receivers, the receiver will log the time, the date, and the ID number of the shark that came by. So think of this kind of like Easy Pass on the toll road, right? So it kind of keeps track of how many times they're passing. Many of these receivers are literally no more than 100 yards off our beaches. So we want to know how much time they're spending in close proximity to the beach. So some of the transmitters that we surgically implant into the sharks have a 10-year battery life, which means we can track an individual from its infancy almost to adulthood. So since 2006, this kind of represents the number of sharks that we've been able to tag in various locations. So there's some interesting patterns that have occurred over time. First of all, we see that there are hotspot locations, and those hotspot locations include Santa Barbara Ventura, Santa Monica Bay, Huntington Beach, Dana Point, and San Onofre. And those hotspot locations also correspond to historic fishing records of where fishers were catching sharks dating back to the 30s. So one of the things that's really interesting, you'll also notice by the size of the shark icons that bigger sharks have been tagged in Santa Barbara and off Dana Point, but the largest we've tagged so far, the largest juveniles, and they're all juveniles, have been tagged in Santa Barbara County. So when we look at the size frequencies of these sharks over time, one of the other things that we've seen that's really interesting is predominantly what we get are mainly babies along our beaches. They're sharks less than 6 feet long, about 5 feet long. They're about 4.5 to about 5.5 feet long at birth. So this is the typical size that we've seen historically. But one of the things we saw this year, which is very unusual, is we saw more larger sharks, sharks that we estimate between 8 and 10 feet long, along Dana Point and Santa Barbara than we've seen in past years. And we're not really sure why that is. In addition to relying on fishers, we also go out and try to catch these sharks ourselves. This is quite a challenge. Sometimes we hire purse seiners. We hire a spotter plane to spot for the sharks from the air. We can encircle the shark and then purse the net up and handle the shark much like we would if we got it from a fisherman. Unfortunately, this costs us about $5,000 a day, and our fish and game permit will not allow us to fish this way within 900 feet of a beach. So the other method that we've developed is working in very shallow water in small boats. Is we can put a piece of entangle net in front of the shark, right in front of the shark, and entangle the shark and handle it. But one of the other things we were hearing about the same time is that the lifeguards were dealing with more and more sightings. So we partnered with the lifeguards, and the lifeguards were telling us, look, these little sharks are just outside the wave break. They're very, very close to shore. So we partnered with them to help get access to more of these sharks. So what we do is I'd put my grad students on the back of a jet ski tow board. So the lifeguards are in fairly shallow water. We either have a helicopter, either sheriff's or police department helicopter, or a drone spotting for them. I'm going to show you a little video footage. So this is footage that my grad student shot. The helicopter's telling them where the shark is. They can drop in the water. We can quickly dart a tag into the shark's back. So our biggest challenge quite often is when we're done tagging, my students would stand up and they'd be in about waist deep of water. And the other challenge was not tagging the same shark twice. So using this method, we're able to tag about 6 sharks in an hour at many of these beaches because the sharks are in these loose aggregations. So one of the things that we found in terms of our pop-off satellite tag data is that these sharks, prior to 2015, showed a very similar pattern. So what I'm going to show you now is a pop-off satellite tag data. So that's the one where it has the tag that gives us temperature and depth. What you're going to see is a date counter up above the color bar, and then the colors represent the water temperatures. So what you're going to see is this shark, let's see if I can get this to run. Oh, go back. There we go. So there's our black smudge. Somewhere in the middle of the black smudge is the shark. You can see our water temperatures are fairly warm. They're probably about high 60s. And as our water temperatures cool down around October, we noticed that all the sharks that we had tagged during those summers started migrating south to Baja. And we'll go all the way down to about Vizcaíno Bay and end up there in around January. The water temperatures in Vizcaíno Bay are equivalent to our water temperatures in the summer. So pretty much every shark that we had tagged in all those years prior to 2015 show this exact same behavior. Now the next shark I'm going to show you was one that we caught in Ventura the same year, but this shark was taken up to Monterey Bay and kept on exhibit for 6 months. Now that shark gained 100 pounds in 6 months, and the aquarium released it because it was eating its tank mates. So they released it in Monterey Bay in February, and the water's a little chilly in February. So remember, this is still a baby white shark. It's less than 1 year old. So watch the black smudge up there. You can see the water's so cold that it drove the shark all the way down to Mazatlan to warm up. And in April, the water, actually, that warm water slug starts pushing the shark up into the Gulf of California. And the water temperatures, sea surface temperatures are about 82 degrees at that point. Right before that tag pops off, that shark started hanging out about 150 feet because the surface waters appeared to get too warm. So using this information, what we found is that these very young white sharks appear to be somewhat temperature sensitive. They don't like water temperatures cooler than 60 degrees, and they don't like water temperatures warmer than 82 degrees. So the other thing that we're finding is that typically when you're at a beach and you see one baby white shark, there's a good chance you're going to see more than one. In other words, they seem to form these loose aggregations. So here's an aerial photograph taken from Santa Monica Bay. Will Rogers Beach would be literally just off screen. You see 2 stand-up paddle boarders there. There are 5 juvenile white sharks in an area the size of a football field. Now, during most of our aerial overflights during these summers, it doesn't matter whether we're talking about Santa Claus Lane, Santa Monica Bay, Huntington Beach, Dana Point, we'd see up to 14 sharks within area, maybe 2 football fields, just outside the wave break. So they appear to form these kind of loose aggregations. So to answer questions about how much time they spend in these beach habitats, this is where we use the acoustic telemetry technology. So the little dots you see are locations where we have about 102 acoustic receivers from Avila all around the Channel Islands. We partner with the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary on our research. And then we have receivers all throughout Southern California. And then I have a colleague in Mexico who's also tagging baby white sharks in Mexico. And they have a receiver array down in an area called Vizcaíno Bay and Scammons Lagoon. So since 2012, the bigger the bubbles tell you how many sharks have been detected in these areas. So you can see that those hotspot areas still kind of hold true. Santa Barbara, Santa Monica Bay, Long Beach, Huntington Beach, Dana Point. And of course, we've been adding more receivers each year, tagging more sharks each year. At this point, we had tagged 9 sharks down to Mexico. And this year is the first year that we had a shark tagged in Mexico that has actually come to California. So what I'm going to show you now is a really interesting phenomenon that we saw in 2015, which changed the pattern that we had seen up to that summer. So what you're going to see is an animation. There's a date and time counter there. All the flashes you see are detections of sharks. So notice this is June. We're detecting sharks off Ventura, Santa Monica Bay, Surfside, Huntington Beach, and San Clemente. And what you'll notice is these sharks are moving. They're staying at maybe one hotspot beach for about 40 days straight, and then we'll hopscotch to another hotspot area. So we have receivers between those locations, but you'll notice we're only detecting them at these hotspot locations. So what was really interesting is you're going to see that date counter start to get October November, our water temperatures normally are dropping below 60 degrees at that time of year. During 2015, our water temperatures never dipped below 65 degrees. What was really interesting, none of the sharks left. None of the sharks we tagged that summer left Southern California, whereas the previous years, all of the sharks left. So what this demonstrated to us was that the El Nino, the water temperature, had actually changed their migratory behavior and kept sharks in Southern California. The next spring, a new batch of newborns started showing up, and the public started calling, saying, what is going on? It looks like the white shark population has exploded. It wasn't that the population exploded, it's that El Nino changed their migration behavior. So what we've seen are these hotspot locations, and this indicates the bigger the bubble, the more sharks detected there since 2012. One of the things that matches very well, it matches well to the historic fishing data that we have going back to the 30s. But the other thing that we've noticed is within these hotspot areas, and a hotspot area could be 40 or 50 miles wide, but there are unique beaches within those areas. So for example, in 2009 to 2011, the only juvenile white sharks that we caught in Santa Monica Bay were off Will Rogers Beach. And the only detections we got from the sharks that we tagged there were only at Will Rogers Beach. In 2012 to 2014, we detected no sharks at Will Rogers Beach. All the sharks were located between Hermosa Beach Pier and Manhattan Beach Pier, which is less than half a mile wide. So why these sharks shifted from one area to another area during different years, we have no idea. But they didn't revisit the hotspot beaches that they were before. So this year we managed to get out to Santa Claus Lane. We haven't been able to do much tagging in Santa Barbara because we just haven't had the funding to get up here and work up here. But we managed to get out on August 24th and tag 6 sharks off Santa Claus Lane. I would say the average size was between 8.5 and 9 feet long. They were some of the largest sharks that we've tagged so far. We had 2 receivers that we put out. We lost one. There was a lot of sand movement, so it completely buried, we think, in the sand. The little blue hash marks you see are detections. So you can see 3 of the 6 sharks that we tagged, and we had the receiver out a month later. We were detecting up till about October, and then the sharks have started to leave. Other people that have been hanging out in the area and flying drones in the area say they've seen fewer and fewer sharks. So it appears that once these sharks find a beach, they will use that beach consistently day and night. So the white bars you see are daytime, the dark bars are nighttime. So sharks are at the beach day and night. They're constantly there when they're at these beaches for periods of up to several months. So one of the other things that we've learned from the sharks that we've caught and surgically implanted tags in, those tags last 10 years, is that these sharks, this is animation, you'll see a date counter at the bottom. You're going to see a little icon and a flash. So this was a shark tagged in 2012 off Ventura. The first time it was detected was off Dana Point. It was then detected off Palos Verdes. And then that next winter, it was detected and overwintered in Scammons Lagoon in Baja. The following summer, that shark comes back to Southern California. So remember, this is 2014. The shark is now 2 years old. It's probably around 7 feet long by now. It goes back to Scammons Lagoon the next winter. And then the next summer, spring, that shark returns to Southern California again. By the time these sharks get to be about 3 years old, they're probably around 8 feet long, probably weigh about 200 pounds. And this in 2015 is the first time we've seen them go north of Point Conception. And that's because in 2015, during the strong El Nino, the water temperatures off Monterey Bay were 65 degrees. So we've seen sharks that we've tagged make 4 annual round trips between Baja and back to Southern California. By the time they're 2 years old, they also start visiting the offshore islands, including San Miguel, Santa Cruz, and Guadalupe. So using this information, we've been able to develop some mathematical models to make predictions on where you should expect to find baby white sharks in particular. So we know that temperature influences their movements. We know that they prefer to be a certain distance from shore and over a certain depth of water. So using a little simple math, we can develop maps that would give us predictions based on sea surface temperature where you should expect to find these sharks. So in this animation, the redder indicates the higher the probability of finding a shark, and the bluer, the lower the probability. So what you'll notice is during the summer, Southern California down to central Baja is a hot spot, and it should be a good nursery habitat for them. But in the winter, our waters typically get too cold, and those sharks migrate and move down into the Gulf and into southern parts of Baja. When we run this model through the El Nino, it accurately predicts exactly what we saw, and that was sharks moving north of Point Conception, moving all the way up to Monterey. during the El Nino period. And as the El Nino is waning, we're now starting to see sharks not exhibit that northward type movement. So we still don't have good answers for why sharks select certain beaches, why they move between certain beaches. So to help answer those questions, we're developing new technology. So I work with a roboticist at Harvey Mudd College to develop autonomous underwater tracking robots. We have funding from the National Science Foundation to do that. So these robots can be programmed. We put a transmitter on a shark. The robot follows the shark around. It knows exactly where the shark is in 3D space and time. The robots can do something we can't do. It can swim and chew gum at the same time. So we can program the robot to move up and down through the water, measuring water temperature, depth, salinity, chlorophyll. Has video cameras so we can see what's happening around the shark, and image sonar. So we can program the robots to follow the sharks around and hopefully tell us why they're picking this beach and not that beach. In addition, we've developed another device we call smart tags. Think of these like Fitbits for sharks. So this is a device that we can clamp onto the shark's dorsal fin. It's got a 3D accelerometer, a 3D gyroscope, a 3D magnetometer. It's got a temperature sensor and a depth sensor, and it's got a video logger so we can see what the shark sees for up to 12 hours. It's got an acoustic transmitter on it so we can follow that shark around and see where it goes. And then after 24 hours, this is designed to pop off. We can recover that and get a very high resolution idea of what that shark is doing. So here's a little video clip of a 1-year-old white shark being released right at Belmont Shore. And you can see the junior lifeguards all standing on the beach waiting for us to release the shark. So using this technology, we can get a better idea of why they're picking certain beaches. The other tools we're using, and we're working very closely with lifeguards on this, are the use of drones. These are a very powerful scientific tool. We're using them to develop methods for surveying along beaches to count how many sharks may be present, but also develop software tools to give lifeguards the ammunition they'll need to go out and identify not only what species of shark they may be seeing, but how large that shark is. So we've worked very closely with lifeguards from Santa Barbara to San Diego to develop protocols on how to respond to beach closures if sharks are sighted, if sharks make contact with people. And one of the things we tell them is if you see a shark over 8 feet, it's a good chance it's a white shark, and you may elect to pull people out of the water. The lifeguards always say, well, how do we know it's not 6 feet? How do we know it's 8 feet? So hopefully using this drone technology, we'll be able to give them the tools that will help them better address public safety issues. In addition, we're also using software to help determine not only where these sharks are. So this is footage shot by the Seal Beach lifeguards, and you can see how disturbed they are by the jet skis. They basically do not care. The lifeguards tried driving them off the beach with the jet skis, and they ignore them. But we can also use this tool as a way of trying to figure out, are they social? Are they in groups because they want to be together, or are they there because they like the conditions? The other tools, because you can't catch and tag every shark, so we've developed basically underwater selfie stations for white sharks. So basically we call these remote underwater video systems. They're GoPros on a stick. We put these, we have my students swim them outside the wave break. We stick them in the sand. We point one camera towards the shore, one offshore. We turn the cameras on, let them run. Sharks are actually curious to the cameras. They'll come up and they'll take a selfie for us. We can then use that footage, and each shark has unique features along its face and along its tail that we can use to identify individuals. So we're working with programmers to develop facial recognition software for white sharks so that we can begin to build libraries. We can begin to identify individuals. So even though we may not be able to tag them, we can still identify them and track them over time. The other thing that we found, and of course we've heard a lot from the public saying, well, maybe there aren't actually more sharks, maybe we just see them more because we're using drones and people have cameras and things like that. So I started talking to the pilots that have been flying in Southern California for 40 years, helicopter pilots, airline pilots, and they've told us that they have never seen more sharks than they have in the last 5 years. So we've started a database. So we've worked with the Sheriff's Department, the Police Department, the Coast Guard, all the pilots that are flying coastal Southern California, and we've developed an online database for them. So this started off as a Google Doc this year. We're going to make this a formal database. We gave them some training, and we gave them the information that we wanted to know, how many sharks were seen, the estimated size of the sharks, locations, the times of day. And this is what we got just from the summer alone. So we had a lot of pilots participating in this study, enough that I think we could use this to build a database to get a more Southern California-wide estimate of what's going on. So we're going to continue training with them. We're going to continue to build this database. It's not for the public right now. We're only using it for water safety and pilots. So we get a lot of information about the size by location. We can get information on detections by month, those sorts of things. Basically, one of the things that I found from my exposure to working with water safety personnel and city councils for the last 5 years with this increasing shark activity is there's a lot of education needed. And we've been at a kind of a science deficit, but we've made great gains in the last 10 years. So getting that information out to lifeguards is one of our top priorities. We work very closely with lifeguards to help them with their social media and their websites to get better information out to the public. We've worked very closely with city governments in regards to this because the lifeguards need that support and the city governments need to be educated about what are the public going to experience, how long are sharks going to be there, can they add new resources to help with that? And in my opinion, education is probably one of the most powerful tools in this regard. And then, of course, we have a lot of general education that needs to be done. So we work very closely with many of the aquaria that are developing outreach programs. So we want to make sure that we get the best science in educators' hands as quickly as possible. And of course, we do a lot with K through 12. So a lot of our tagging data is actually being used in 8th grade physics curricula right now. So this funding for this project has come pretty much solely from Monterey Bay Aquarium. Our budget has been fairly modest. We've had some private donations, but with increasing shark numbers and sightings over more locations in Southern California, we ran out of money by June this year. So we have a lot of in-kind support from a lot of cities, including the city of Santa Barbara, because you've bought your own acoustic receivers, and like many cities are doing that, and that really helps. But we're still strapped in terms of being able to have the funds we need to help complete that process and expand this research to the point where we can start to answer those important questions. So thank you.
Wow, thank you very much, Dr. Lowe. I had a couple of questions.
Sure.
So what's the total population of sharks you've tagged?
So we have 35 sharks with active tags in them right now. Since we started in 2002, we have handled over 160 juvenile white sharks. Some of those were dead. Some of those sharks we've done necropsies and other studies on. And this study has kind of grown and expanded. So right now, this year was our biggest year. We tagged 29 sharks.
And so when you look at this, do you look at, you made some inferences about temperature and migrating with temperature, but is that because they don't like the cold water or their food source doesn't like the cold water?
So that's a good question. So we know that the juveniles, the babies, are temperature sensitive, but white sharks are endothermic, which means they can keep their bodies warmer than the water. That's how they can swim so fast and launch themselves out of the water and chase down marine mammals. So once they're probably over about 2 years old, they're less temperature sensitive. So they can move north of Point Conception, they can move to the offshore islands. Their prey, most of their prey, are highly migratory. So elephant seals migrate out to the middle of the Pacific. So historically, I think what's happened is, these sharks show up in the fall, they feed on those marine mammals, and when those mammals leave, what we know from adult white shark tagging is that they move out to the middle of the Pacific, and they'll spend 8 months to a year and a half out there before returning to those aggregation sites. However, as the populations grow, and I think it's growing, those aggregation sites are getting crowded. And I think adult and subadult white sharks, teenagers, are looking for new feeding habitats. My prediction is the Channel Islands will be that new habitat. Just because of the size of the rookeries out there. There's an ample food source, and much of that food source is not migratory. So that would provide food year-round. So, but we know nothing about adult white sharks to the offshore Channel Islands.
And what role do you think the marine mammal protection has played in the growth of that? Do you have any feeling for that?
I would argue it plays a huge role. So I think protection of the juveniles from fishing pressure has enabled the population to start to recover.
Right.
But it's really been recovery of the adult food source. It's been marine mammal recovery, which has been resounding, really.
Right.
So, I think those probably are the two biggest indicators. And when we look at marine mammal data, so for example, this past year, the marine mammal biologist out in San Miguel Island counted over 500 seals or sea lions that made it back to the beach with large white shark bites on them. So that was between July and August. Those are only the ones that made it back to the beach. So we think that that's really important factor in maybe not only increasing the population, but spreading the population out.
Mm-hmm. What's the farthest away you've got a tag pop up on one of these things? Was it
the juveniles?
Mazatlan or? Yeah,
the juveniles, probably the farthest away is Mazatlan.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they stay pretty much just in that area?
The juveniles tend to stay coastal,
Right,
and then
right.
we know a lot about the babies. We know a lot about the adults. We know very little about the sizes in between.
Okay.
So the tracks that I showed you are about the only data that we have for those sizes of sharks. So we
Yeah.
really don't know what to expect for those sharks that are between 7 and about 12 feet long.
Okay. What about other species of sharks? Do we see a lot of those along the coast as well?
Yeah. So leopard shark populations seem to be doing well in Southern California. Thresher shark populations seem to be recovering well since they're overfishing back in the 80s. So we're seeing a recurrence of them. Soup fin sharks seem to be doing well. So pretty much all the species that were negatively impacted by the gillnet fishery seem to be recovering really well since then.
Okay. All right, well, thank you. Any other questions or comments, please?
Thank you, Doctor. Real quick, you showed some dramatic video of the darting of the sharks, and then you mentioned that the ones locally were about 8.5 to 9 feet. Do the baby sharks show aggressive behavior? Is some of the concern hysteria or well placed?
So we haven't seen evidence of aggressive behavior from the small ones, the babies. My best example is Santa Monica Bay in 2013. We had probably in the neighborhood of 20 to 25 young of the year white sharks within 100 yards of the shore. And between Hermosa Beach and Manhattan Beach Pier, there can be 4,000 or 5,000 people in the water. Those people were amongst those sharks every single day of the summer. And we know those sharks were there every day because we have data for that. So all I can tell people is there doesn't appear to be any evidence that those young sharks pose a threat to people based on those. The bigger ones, however, it's a matter of size. The bigger they get, the less shy they become. Those are the ones we know the least about. And of course, that's where we come up with the recommendation for the lifeguards that if you see sharks over 8 feet, you may want to pay attention to that. If sharks make contact with a board or make contact with a person, those are the times when you definitely want to pull people out of the water. There is no indication that those are actually signs of aggression, but for safety's sake, that's a good precaution.
Excellent. Thank you.
Anything else? All right.
One of the things I've noticed about sharks in general is that people tend to make really poor decisions when they think there's one near. So it's not just the threat of being bitten or attacked by a shark, but it's actually the fear that is generated in one, and you just make bad decisions. Mm-hmm. Kind of with that in mind, have you ever had any municipality fund some of the more expensive the acoustic receivers that give you real-time data that you can actually see when a shark is nearby the day that it shows up?
So that technology exists. It's very expensive. We are actually right now developing a new form. Hopefully it'll be a lot cheaper. So the system that exists now uses the Iridium satellite system, the most expensive cell phone system you could possibly imagine. We're working on a new system that will have radio buoys that would provide real-time data, but it's using radio signals. So as long as one of those buoys is within a mile of a base station, like a lifeguard headquarters or something like that, you could get real-time data. We're going to try to prototype that this spring. So hopefully if that works and we can keep the costs lower, we'd like to move away from our underwater submerged systems and move towards that. However, with that said, we always want to remind people that these are not early warning systems and they shouldn't be used that way because we cannot tag every shark. We're using it primarily as an educational tool and a science tool. And again, your point is that sometimes people, if they have this perception of safety, they do riskier things than they would if they had no perception of safety.
Right. Okay, anything else? No, well, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
That was a great presentation. Thank you. All right. Moving ahead. Item number 6.
Item 6, protocols for posting shark advisories on city beaches. Recommendation that Harbor Commission receive a staff report on protocols for posting beach advisories when sharks are sighted in city waters.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, number one, Dr. Lowe is a tough act to follow, but So this may seem a little drier, though at the same time it's an important component of Shark Week here at the Harbor Commission. A couple of months ago, Commissioner Spicer asked that we discuss what our protocols are for posting advisories on the beaches, and I think it's a good companion presentation, not nearly as sophisticated, of course, to what Dr. Lowe showed us this evening. So here we go. So on the left, you see a typical advisory sign that we post on the beach in response to increased shark sightings. We've been seeing an increase in shark sightings since 2012, and we've been working with the Parks and Recreation Department jointly since 2014 on our program for posting the beaches, because what we're trying to do is interpret the science, keep up with the science as folks like Dr. Lowe and his colleagues present it, and at the same time be able to advise the public without scaring the public. It's a tricky balance, and I'll get into more of the nuances of that trickiness here as we go forward. So the good news is we've had no direct attacks on human beings recorded in Santa Barbara waters, Santa Barbara city waters on record. Now, that being said, there have been this is anthropomorphic certainly, but you might call it the accidental attack, where animals are going after taking a bite out of a kayak or an SUP. That's happened a few times, and yes, that can come dangerously close to somebody's foot or leg. So, it's only really a matter of inches. So this sort of increases our sensitivity and attention to the importance of the postings and the education. The first step to posting beaches, and it's the most important, is confirming the credibility of a shark sighting. And there's sort of a branding thing on the left, if you'll allow me, that's going to appear on each slide. So the confirmation process, how do we do that? When information comes into either Harbor Patrol or city parks, it's most often Harbor Patrol. That's kind of the go-to for folks. You can come by phone call, radio. Somebody can walk up into the office and say, "You wouldn't believe what I just saw." We have a form. It's attached to your staff report tonight. It's a shark information or confirmation form, and it has a variety of questions that are used to try and to get a full snapshot, if we can, as to what the nature of the sighting was. Was it observed from shore or the ocean, from a boat, a paddleboard, a kayak? Was the reporting party familiar with sharks? We could have, to give you two extreme examples, we could have an elderly person with not good eyesight standing on Shoreline Park watching a dolphin splash a mile offshore and call us and say, "Shark, shark." Or we could have somebody who's been a commercial fisherman for 35 years and says it sees a 14-footer finning in the harbor mouth, right? So there's this wide range of reporting, and that brings back emphasis to the importance of the confirmation and the credibility of those sightings. Color, size, is it finning? How high was the fin? What was the shape of the fin? These are all on the forms, and they help inform us, being city staff, as to whether or not we're going to post our city beaches. So these answers are reported on the shark interview form to confirm the credibility. Now, the beach postings, we have a list, and it's in your packet as well, of up to 18 city sites where we post the advisories, and you'll hear me say advisories because these are not warnings; they're advisories. Ultimately, people are going to do what people do, right? And they get ignored a whole bunch of the time. And as you'll see here in this report, and as Dr. Lowe alluded to, down in Huntington, people go swimming and recreate amid the sharks every day. So it's a judgment call on our part relative to posting. It's a judgment call on individuals' part whether or not to recreate in those nearshore waters, because ultimately it's their responsibility to make the decision. So typically the way we do, like I say, there are 18 city sites. We don't post all of them all the time, right? We typically post 1 mile east and west of where the shark sighting was. If it was like off Ledbetter, we might post down, toward East Beach, but not all the way down to the city limits, down by the graveyard. It can vary depending on the location, and again, the shark behavior, right? Where we post and whether we post. Passive versus aggressive, a sighting versus a sea lion attack. We might not even have a report of a sighting, but a large sea lion may come limping into the harbor or along the breakwater with its entrails hanging out. I apologize for being graphic. With its entrails hanging out, 20, 30 feet behind him and a huge, shark bite on it. That's an indication that we have reason to post the beaches as well. So, whole lot of variables to consider. So this is very much reflective of what Dr. Lowe is showing down in Huntington Beach. This is Santa Claus Lane, Padaro Lane. You can go there every day this time of year, and you will see these sharks. I don't mean to create a tourist rush, but the fact of the matter is you can see these sharks, and the bathers and recreational crowd are right there on those beaches, and the sharks are not shy. They'll swim right up to, I'm embarrassed, I'm repeating what Dr. Lowe was saying. They will swim right up to a GoPro camera and nudge it, I wouldn't use the word curiosity because that's a human concept, but they're certainly not afraid of them. And so these kind of elements need to be taken into consideration too. In this area, the shoreline is speckled with private homes and county land, and so the private homes, the access to the beach is tough, so it's hard to post right there. The county beaches are easier to post, and they have pretty much permanent signage down there that's fairly generic, that says something to the effect of, sharks have been known to frequent this area, swim at your own risk. And that reminds me to touch on another point. When we have a credible sighting and we decide to post for it, we have what's called a shark notification list. We've worked with several jurisdictions over the last 4 years at least. Santa Barbara County Parks, the city of Carpinteria, the city of Goleta, up and down the line. And even if we're just going to post in a very localized area, we send an email through our shark notification list just so they're aware of the situation that we have decided warrants posting, just so they know. It's an FYI, and it's really worked well in terms of team communication and being able to understand the location and nature of these shark populations, and as Dr. Lowe described them, the hot beaches. I think Dr. Lowe mentioned this. This is clearly one of the hot beaches, not in terms of danger, but in terms of it's really attractive for some reason to these sharks. Okay, I mentioned the tricky balance. Okay, priority number one is always going to be public safety, right? We have luckily not had an attack on a human being, but we assess things like aggressive behavior, closeness to shore. It's kind of funny. On the form, it actually has what direction was it swimming, which I always thought was kind of, it can turn quickly. So that's not one of the line items that I pay close attention to. But it's a balance because we have, especially in these months where the sharks are so populous along the coast, we have our Parks and Recreation has its ocean recreation programs, especially night moves and reef and run. And so there have been times, wouldn't you know it, when a shark gets spotted, sighted near shore, the large shark sometimes, although most of them are juveniles, like Dr. Lowe described, and we feel an obligation based on priority one here to post the beaches. And I've had some very uncomfortable discussions with the organizers of those offshore or those nearshore swimming events. I've even been told, sharks always show up when it's our event. What about the other? They've been interesting discussions, and Parks and Rec has had those same discussions. But sometimes we got to make those tough calls. I mean, I'll be honest with you. Commissioner Spicer and I have spoken about this before. Sometimes it feels a little bit like Amity Island. Am I Sheriff Brody or am I the mayor? Wanting the recreational activity to continue. But I've been tempted at times to wear the plaid pants and the orange shirt, but I haven't gotten that far yet. So each sighting is different. It requires a full review of circumstances and credibility. You can read there is no one size fits all, okay? Typical postings are for 48 hours. We used to do 72, but working, with Dr. Lowe and his colleagues and jurisdictions and municipalities, especially to the south of us, it seemed to be the trend went to 48 hours. And so we typically post for 48 hours if it's not a hugely aggressive situation or a nearshore attack of some kind that we feel like we need to post for a longer time or consider closing a beach, which we haven't done yet, but it's not beyond our scope of opportunities, if you will, or the toolbox, if you will. It's not a tool that's completely off the table because, God forbid, if something really bad happened, we would in fact close the beaches, but that involves getting especially between Memorial Day and Labor Day, getting lifeguards involved in their trucks, on their paddle boards, in jet skis. It involves getting our harbor patrol boats on the water, and involves getting people on the beaches, warning them not. You still can't tell people are going to do what they're going to do. So closing the beach doesn't mean you set up a police line, with 130, all 135 or 38 officers and line the beaches, but you do the very, very best you can to close the beach and tell people not a good day to go swimming. We haven't gotten there yet. And thankfully, hearing Dr. Lowe's presentation, it's funny, I've heard it like 3 times, but each time it's got new information and new science and new things, and it's equally as fascinating every time. But what I'm hearing out of that, it's good news that these juvenile sharks don't seem to be aggressive relative to people. We see it at Padaro Lane. He showed down at Huntington Beach where that seems to be the case. So I think that's a good news takeaway from all of this. So again, no full closures today. And by comparison, we've posted beaches 14 times since 2014. And you could see by the clusters in Dr. Lowe's presentation that we are a pretty popular place in the summertime for these juvenile white sharks. There's no getting away from that. And working with him and his colleagues, we're going to be keeping an eye on this situation year after year after year. Does it continue to be juveniles? Do they get a little bigger? Does their behavior get bigger? Because, and Dr. Lowe, please correct me if I'm wrong, but once they get a certain size, they not only get less afraid, they begin to change their appetite from fishes to marine mammals, and that's where things can get a little problematic, where anthropomorphic, again, they may, it may be a case of mistaken identity for the guy on the boat, on the boogie board or the kayak or the stand-up paddleboard. So we're going to keep a close eye on this. We have partnered with Dr. Lowe and his team. We have 2 acoustic receivers out there. They're on buoys that are far enough distance apart so they don't shake hands, if you will, overlap each other in terms of the acoustic reception. And we look forward to continuing to work with him and posting the beaches as necessary. And this is really an important program to us, and we intend to stay at it. And that concludes my part of the presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions on our end.
Questions? Mayor?
Mick, I'd like to comment that I like the fact that you stay away from the mandatory evacuation notice. I think, especially for the diving community out at UCSB, it's particularly welcome to have good information about the sighting, what it was, whether it was a marine mammal or a credible sighting of some other kind. And to keep those notifications more as kind of an informational thing, whether you're a shark lover and you want to go out and see them and you're willing to take the risk paddling out there, or you're so deathly afraid that you're sure you'll stub your toe just thinking about getting close to the water and hurt your toe. So I like the way things are going currently with respect to the notifications.
Thank you, Commissioner McCreary, and I think you nailed what our intentions are there. Unless it's a really dramatic event, our job is education and advisory. And folks are ultimately going to do what they're going to do. But I appreciate, like you're on the, UCSB is on the shark notification list. And so if we see a shark down at East Beach, you're going to get the notification. So folks, organizations, entities, municipalities can make their own decisions. That said, if we cancel a reef and run or a night moves event, we keep our city staff out of the water. Okay, so they're really on their own if they want to undertake that event, because it's not programmatically, if you'll allow me, correct to tell people, here's an advisory, you may want to, think twice about going in the water, and then sending paid city staff out there to accompany those events. Because the real message is, this is a time for caution, and do as you must, but we're not just going to reflect the fact that we don't think there's a possibility of something bad happening by accompanying those races.
Yeah.
Mr. Croman, thank you so much for the presentation. I appreciate it. I think, as a geographer, I find this fascinating. But I think to underscore the biggest thing is what Dr. Lowe said and what you said is education. Two things I'll take away from tonight is they're always out there, night and day, and they don't seem to be a direct threat. So I appreciate the education and your point that public safety is number one, and I appreciate all the attention this gets. So thank you.
I would just conclude by again thanking Dr. Lowe. Working with him has been an honor, and it has helped inform our actions and our programs. And I look forward to a long and continued relationship with Dr. Lowe and his program. I think it's really a beneficial partnership.
I have a question. It's kind of along that line, and maybe it's for Dr. Lowe, maybe it's for you. With all these different public safety organizations up and down the coast where these sharks are, is there an effort to coordinate and figure out what the best practice is in handling these things, for everything from notifications that we've talked about to what to do if there is something, a human attack or something like that? Is there any coordinated effort?
I'll take a brief shot, and I'll hand it over to Dr. Lowe. Of course, there's a coordinated effort. If something went wrong here in Santa Barbara, we have a lot of resources, from Harbor Patrol to the lifeguards to the fire department's water rescue team. We have a lot of resources we can throw at an incident really fast. The Coast Guard. Unfortunately, sometimes if there were a bad incident, this has happened to the Channel Islands, we all know that arteries bleed fast and what have you, but we have plenty of resources to throw at an incident.
Yeah, I guess my question was more along the lines of notification, and we've talked about, the conflicting things going on here with notification. And so is there coordination between the various municipalities or public safety groups about, hey, we did this and we found this really worked well, and maybe you guys want to try that, or we tried this, or things like that?
I have a few thoughts, but I will defer to the expert.
So in 2014, the LA County Lifeguards organized a workshop it was primarily lifeguards from San Diego to Santa Barbara, just to do that, just to get everybody together and try to come to some consensus on protocols. What do you do if shark's sighted? How do you confirm a sighting? When do you want to post, those sorts of things. Because of all the activity this year, the chiefs want to do that again. And I think somebody's trying to organize a meeting for all of Southern California, and this time include more than just lifeguards. So I think they're going to include harbor masters and other groups. And the idea is to get at just that, increase the communication network. And I want to point out, by the way, that communication network is probably one of the best I've seen. So the one for Santa Barbara is excellent. And the other municipalities still, they kind of are small. Some of them have very small beaches that they cover. You have jurisdictions that butt right up against. And even they don't have as good a communication as I've seen from Santa Barbara. So I think they would benefit from learning from what Santa Barbara's done.
Yeah, good.
So hopefully this winter, I think they're talking about February or March.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you, Mick.
Item 7, Draft Coastal Land Use Plan Review. Recommendation that the Harbor Commission receive an informational presentation on the Draft Coastal Land Use Plan, the draft plan's public outreach and review, and draft policies relating to the harbor and waterfront.
Chair Sloan, Deborah Andaloro, a principal planner with the city, and Timmy Bolton, another planner with the city, will be making this presentation tonight.
All right. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Sloan, Commissioners. I will echo Mr. Cronin's what he said. This is a tough act to follow. However, We really appreciate you taking time from your busy agenda to allow us to provide this presentation this evening on the overall local coastal program update and specifically about the draft coastal land use plan. This is an important planning document for the city and for our community. Conducting outreach and providing information meetings is a very important part of coastal planning and the draft coastal land use plan. We're pleased to be here before you today. The LCP update work effort is being conducted by the long-range planning staff. While Timmy will be giving the presentation this evening, this has definitely been a team effort, and I'd like to recognize Melissa Hetrick and Rosie Deisty and Adam Nares. They are giving presentations also to other commissions and committees. The staff team is also grateful to the assistance of the subcommittee, including the members of the Harbor Commission that have assisted us for the last 4 years on this plan, as well as the staff of the Waterfront Department who have been invaluable. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Timmy.
Hi, thank you, Deborah. So the purpose of my presentation today is to provide information on our local coastal program update, provide a report on our draft coastal land use plan, and specifically the policies of that relate to the harbor and waterfront area, as well as to provide a status update on the outreach and review of that effort. I'm first just going to go a little bit into the background, what the Coastal Act is, where the coastal zone is, and how that all relates to Santa Barbara. So first and foremost, the California Coastal Act of 1976 is really structured around this concept of protecting, enhancing, and balancing the use of coastal resources. It also heavily focuses on maximizing public access to the coast, and one of the things it prioritizes is the so-called coastal-dependent and coastal-related uses, which I'm going to describe a little bit more later. One of the primary aspects of the Coastal Act is that it directed local jurisdictions to create a so-called Local Coastal Program, or LCP, which is the standard of review for all coastal permitting within the coastal zone. A key aspect of this is that the local coastal program must be consistent with the Coastal Act, and it must also be certified by the Coastal Commission. The components of a local coastal program are these two elements listed here: a coastal land use plan, or LUP, which includes the land use designation and the resource protection policies, and an implementation plan, or IP, which includes zoning, implementing ordinances, procedures, and other types of guidelines. When we talk about the coastal zone, it's this dark gray area here below that dark blue line. And as you'll notice, this wholly encompasses the city's entire shoreline of approximately 6 miles, and it wholly includes the harbor, wharf area, as well as all the waterfront area. When we go through and we look at this coastal zone area, and the Waterfront Department's work and the Harbor Commission's work, we see that we have a long history of coastal stewardship. A large portion of this land area is in public ownership, with approximately 70% of the shoreline owned by the city. We have the types of uses that the Coastal Act prioritizes, including a harbor and a wharf area and other types of coastal dependent things. We also meet the intention of providing public access through our ample, free, and lower cost recreational opportunities, as well as free parking and etc. And so on balance, to date, we've really been well aligned with the Coastal Act, and so the question then is, why do we need to update the plan? One of the principal reasons is to modernize and reflect current conditions. Our original coastal land use plan was certified by the Coastal Commission in 1981. Since then, we have had no comprehensive updates. We have done piecemeal amendments, but we haven't really taken a comprehensive look at that. Similarly, the implementation plan was certified in 1986, and as you might imagine, there's been a lot of changes over the last 30 years in this coastal zone. Another element is that there's been a number of large-scale planning efforts, notably the 2011 General Plan Update, as well as the recently adopted new zoning ordinance. Neither of these efforts apply in the coastal zone because they have not been certified by the Coastal Commission. Additionally, as part of this change over the last 30 years, there are existing regulatory frameworks that have some ambiguity in them. So one of the things that's needed is to clarify how we address complex topics, as well as to codify some of the procedures that the planning staff implements while doing development review permitting. And finally, the original and our current certified LCP does not consider sea level rise at all, and sea level rise is happening and is anticipated to continue to happen in the future, so we need to include that within this LCP planning process. So the focus of this update, there's a number of individual components to it. The first is an update to the appeal jurisdiction map, which is basically the geographic boundaries for how different types of coastal permitting appeals work, and we have completed that effort working with the Coastal Commission staff. There's also a component to update the coastal land use plan, which is what the bulk of this presentation will focus on, and we are currently working on now. We are separately about to embark on a sea level rise adaptation plan. Currently, we are about to interview consultants to develop that plan. There will also be a lower cost visitor serving accommodation study, which will happen in 2018. And finally, the new zoning ordinance will be presented as a local coastal program amendment in 2018. And with that, I'm going to focus on the draft coastal land use plan, how it was developed, what it contains, and how that relates to the harbor area and waterfront. So over the last 4 years, we have worked very intimately with the Coastal Commission staff to develop this draft coastal land use plan. Anyone who's worked with the Coastal Commission knows that it is a slow process. They are very interested in hyper detail and specific language, and so the consultation process takes a long time. Because in a general planning process in the city, we are just concerned with the local preferences and priority, whereas the Coastal Commission has to consider the implications throughout the state. And so while we may be great actors in maximizing public access and providing low-cost visitor serving accommodations and et cetera, there are other instances where it might not be so good throughout the state. So in terms of what this local coastal draft LUP contains, we did not conduct a new visioning effort as part of this. Because we have a robust sort of framework for coastal planning, we focused on existing visioning things, and also because we're required to be retained within the visioning of the actual Coastal Act. So we carry forward the relevant policies of the Harbor Master Plan, as well as those in the 2011 General Plan Update. We do include a number of new policies that are primarily based around codifying and clarifying existing criteria and how we implement and interpret coastal development permits. And we also are beginning to address emerging issues such as sea level rise. In terms of the scope of the plan, it's fairly wide-ranging, coming from just background information on the Coastal Act, to how our visitor serving and recreational facilities operate, to including biological resources. The three most pertinent to the waterfront and harbor area are the chapters I've highlighted here, which are coastal dependent and related development, public access, and coastal hazards. When we look at the coastal dependent and related development section, this is really the heart of the harbor and Stearns Wharf use and facility section. We don't have any sort of new visioning for the harbor or this area. It's really bringing those policies forward, and that's where the Harbor Master Plan will live in the future, by and large. When we look at public access, a lot of these policies are actually carried forward from the 1997 circulation element. But there is this new heightened concern by the Coastal Commission about car parking in the coastal zone. And a new concept that we have here is this idea of key public access parking areas. And what that means is staff went through a whole exercise to determine which parking areas within these coastal zones are the ones that provide critical public access to the shoreline. And within these areas, the regulations are a little bit stricter, but there is the ability to still reduce and place restrictions in these areas. And as an example, you could still increase the price of parking within these areas as long as you can make the finding that it doesn't significantly impact coastal access. So you could increase the price a little bit, but if you, for instance, probably couldn't do it to $200 an hour. And so when you talk about where these key public access parking areas actually are, those are the ones in this kind of pink fuchsia color, which is a little hard to see. But in essence, it includes all of essentially the waterfront managed parking lots and some other on-street lots. In the coastal hazards section, we are beginning to address sea level rise, but I do want to highlight that everything in this plan is definitely intended as interim. As I mentioned, we will be embarking on a sea level rise adaptation plan shortly, and that's where we'll start to get more at the heart of the matter in terms of this whole sea level rise issue and what the city's vision is forward. Continuing along that theme of really clarifying what the standards and practices are, we've created this concept of shoreline hazard screening areas, which are 6 distinct areas that are shown on this map here. And within each of those, we clearly have the procedures as well as the requirements for technical reports and et cetera for each of these areas. Within the harbor and waterfront area, there's the 3 areas that apply. It's the city-owned low-lying beach and backshore area, which is the yellow color, the darkest gray, which is Stearns Wharf and Harbor, and then there's also a little bit in the inland coastal flooding area, which is that blue color. I want to highlight that really there's not a huge shift here in terms of the requirements for development within these areas currently, although it is likely that things may be tweaked as part of the sea level rise adaptation plan. So in summary, the harbor and Stearns Wharf are priority coastal uses as defined in the Coastal Act. We are fortunate to have a wealth of priority coastal access and recreational opportunities for residents and visitors alike within the waterfront area. The policies proposed in the draft coastal land use plan allow for continued operations and improvements within the harbor and waterfront area, although the existing and new facilities may need to adapt to increased coastal storms and sea level rise and other associated hazards in the future. In terms of outreach and our schedule, to date we have done quite a lot from an informational campaign, ranging from an open house to scheduled informational meetings, community presentations. We have a robust website, and we have done quite a number of media noticing, putting flyers around town, and also the opportunity for Spanish translation. In terms of the actual schedule for this, we released the plan this past Saturday when we had an open house. Last night we were at Parks and Rec as well as the Creeks Advisory Committee, and today we're in front of you at the Harbor Commission. We have met with a couple of community groups, and we have a number more scheduled in the coming weeks. And in January, we will be concluding our public review period. All comments, including those from commissions, will be forwarded and bundled to the Planning Commission for its consideration, and we will be in front of them in springtime of 2018. Shortly thereafter, we will be heading to the Planning Commission for adoption, and we hope to submit to the Coastal Commission for certification by summer of 2018. And in terms of additional information, if you want to learn more about this effort, really the best place to go is our website, santabarbraca.gov/LCP. There's also the ability to get on our notifications list, and you'll get an email blast anytime we have any sort of concrete shift. In terms of comments from this commission, staff preference is that there's some sort of either a letter of support or a comment letter done by the whole board, agendized for a future meeting that we can package and submit to the Planning Commission during their review. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions or concerns you may have. Thank you.
Right, any questions? Betsy?
Yeah, I've got one question about parking and whether the fact that the parking lots are not free constitutes a restriction or a problem for the Coastal Commission.
Chair Sloan, Commissioner Kramer, no, I don't think that's an issue. In general, our rates for parking are significantly lower than most places throughout the state. And in general, you're allowed to have price parking in the coastal zone. It's really only an issue when it's cost prohibitive for people to come to the coast.
And there's also on-street parking as well noted, I think, in your map, which is free, most places, unless it's metered.
Correct. Chair Sloan, Commissioner Kramer, the key areas that are identified in the draft coastal plan, those are ones where we're saying that those are areas that provide the access to the shoreline and to coastal recreation. And so there is a higher level of scrutiny if you were to do, say, you wanted to raise your rates and you wanted to raise them significantly. We would have to look at that very closely and to determine whether or not the raising of the rates would result in like a significant change to how people would utilize the lots. And then there might be a need for mitigation somehow. It doesn't say that you can't do it. It says that we have to look at it closer.
Right.
So the Coastal Commission is really concerned about jurisdictions when they go in and they might have always had free parking and all of a sudden parking is $12 a day and people are no longer going to that particular location because they can't afford to, or the restriction becomes it's not, you can't park there all day long. You can only park for 90 minutes. And so for people who want to go to the shoreline, that can be a deterrent. They want to be there for multiple hours at a time.
Right.
So we just need to look at it closer in the future.
Thank you. And when do you expect to have the sea level study done?
Chair Sloan, Commissioner Kramer, we have grant funding from the Coastal Commission. We have to have the study completed by April of 2019. So we have all of next year to take a look at it. Because part of it's not only doing this study, there's an economic analysis and a vulnerability study that are attached to it, and also then policy development, because what the consultant will be doing is looking at these interim policies and determining what types of adjustments need to be made to them, and then also looking more at that visioning about how are we going to change in the future to adapt to sea level rise. We did not do that with this plan. Right. So there's a lot of options that could be available, and that will take a lot of dialogue with the community too before a decision's made.
Thank you very much.
Merritt?
We have private boaters that use our launch ramp, of course, and they're throughout the season we're continually juggling the parking apportionment between the launch ramp, trailer, and essentially usually truck parking versus the single vehicle parking. How do you address that, and how do you see that going in the future? Staying as it is? Any changes?
Chair Sloan, Commissioner McCray, the city conducted several studies in the past called waterfront area transit studies, I believe, transportation studies. And they, at that time, kind of determined the number of stalls and the balance. So that's the study. When we re-slurry our lots and restripe them, we really do that consistent with that study that was done. So at this time, that we don't propose to make any changes to the launch ramp with respect to the number of stalls for trailers and single stalls.
I'd just like to point out something that this gentleman showed me at the open house on Saturday, a website that I would recommend to everybody to fiddle around with because it's really fun and interesting, educational. It's called ourcoastourfuture.org. And you can make various assumptions and see where the water is. I discovered, for example, that my house will be within a block of the new shoreline, but only if the sea level rise is 17 feet. So maybe not.
All right. Any other comments or questions? So I think what we've been asked to do is provide some feedback to them on this plan. And so is there specific parts of the plan that you would suggest that the commissioners all review, and how do they get copies of that?
Chair Sloan, I think the sections that Timmy reviewed for you today are the ones that you have the closest relationship with. That's what we saw when we reviewed the plan and where the Harbor Master Plan policies now live. So I would encourage you to look at those sections and to read them and read the policies closely. I think in the staff report there was also the attachment that shows exactly where your Harbor Master Plan policies ended up. Copies of the plan, we have some of them in our office. I've given a copy to Carl and he would probably loan his out. We can loan them out from our office. It is available online. And I would suggest that you contact staff if you need a copy, and we can make that available to you. We are looking for a letter from the commission. I think it's helpful for the Planning Commission in their consideration of the document when it is before them to see that the Harbor Commission has reviewed it, and that as a body that will be using it in the future, that you've reviewed it and you can comment on any section or say you support the document. I think that's valuable for the Planning Commission to hear from the Harbor Commission.
Okay.
And I have also, we have these postcards, and I just want to, if you were at the open house, you might have picked one up, but it does have all the staff contacts here. because like I said, this was a team effort. So different staff people worked on different sections of the document. If you were interested in learning more about sea level rise and the USGS tool, Timmy would be the person that we would want you to contact, and he'd be happy to sit down with you and walk you through the whole presentation of that particular tool. So I'm going to leave these with Carl for you guys.
Okay, good. So what I might suggest that we do is review those 3 sections that they outlined. And could you review those again for us real quickly?
Chair Sloan, the 3 most pertinent sections would be section 2.2, I believe, which is coastal dependent and related development. It's 3.1, which is public access, and 5.1, which is coastal hazards.
Okay. So what I might suggest we do is we review those individually, and if we have any comments or questions, we consolidate them with Carl, and he can be our point person on staff to try and pull these things together and post them to the others to get some answers and then coordinate it. Does that make sense, Carl?
Chair Sloan, that's correct. And if need be, depending on the nature of the comments and the extent of the comments, I can bring it back in January for review by the entire commission. If we
Okay, so when I look at the public comment, that's different. So we don't have to have our comments or completely vetted out by the 11th of January.
That's
Okay.
correct. The commission hearing is a few days afterwards, so it's pretty
Right.
close to
Right.
the public
Okay.
comment period.
Okay. Okay, good. Does that make sense, everybody? Sure. Okay, good. Well, thank you very much for the presentation. All right. Commission staff communication. Is there anything we missed tonight?
Chair Sloan, no comments from staff this evening.
Okay. Anything from our side?
It's lobsters.
Okay. Would someone like to?
Apparently, Mick wants to report on something.
Oh, okay.
I apologize. Just one note. I don't know if any of you read about it, but on October 24th, the director of the California Department of Fish and Wildlife closed a chunk of the lobster fishery at Anacapa Island and the east end of Santa Cruz Island, owing to higher than tolerable levels of domoic acid. Again, it's reared its head. They have since shrunk that back, but just for public information, there's still a closure basically running from Blue Banks on the north side of the island around to Scorpion Cove on the south side of Santa Cruz Island. And folks can keep checking the California Department of Fish and Wildlife website. And if I see a press release come out, I'll shoot it out to the fishermen and I will copy the commission.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay. Anything else? Someone
I
want to?
would move that we adjourn.
Okay. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay.